Space Paranoids and The Grid, two worlds based on the same movies. The inclusion of two worlds based on one movie series has led to a bit of confusion. I'm going to be doing my absolute best to address everything, however there is quite a lot to explain, so if I do accidentally miss something, please let me know in the comments down below, and I will gladly explain it there. I'll explain Space Paranoids first because there's a lot less to explain, and it's also the first time that we actually see Tron within the series. Space Paranoids is a world within a computer within Radiant Garden. It is a world within a world, similar to the 100 Acre Wood. Once Sordal and Goofy arrive within Space Paranoids, they encounter Tron, of which he then explains that the version of the grid that they are in is actually a copy of the original. He also explains that Ansem the Wise used this version for town maintenance as well as for his own personal research. As far as the town maintenance is concerned, we don't really get a clear explanation as to what he's exactly referring to. One of those things is most likely the security system that we see in Radiant Garden throughout Kingdom Hearts 2. And as far as the personal research goes, that is actually a reference and an explanation to the Data Twilight Town that Ansem created at the beginning of Kingdom Hearts 2. This is also the first time in the series where we actually see the concept of data worlds, and the question comes up of what exactly separates data and a data world? Where is the line between those two things? And this is later on going to be expanded on and explained even further in detail in Kingdom Hearts Coded in 2008. At the end of Space Paranoids, we see Tron hug Sordal and Goofy, and then essentially jump off of a cliff. A lot of people have a misconception that Tron dies, however that's absolutely not true. As evidenced by right after when we return to the Radiant Garden, we see that Tron is still alive, and that he has essentially now become the new MCP. He is the new Master Control Program, as we see that he is still conscious, and he even gives Sordal and Goofy a message, and even explains the Door to Darkness to him. The final note of Space Paranoids is actually once again at the beginning when they first meet Tron. Tron mentions that the original version, that being the grid, was destroyed. So how exactly is it that we can go to the grid if it is destroyed, according to Tron? And I'll explain that shortly. Now that I've covered Space Paranoids, let's move on to the grid. The grid is the original version of the world that Space Paranoids is a copy of. As Xemnas explains to Sora, the grid is not a sleeping world as Data cannot dream. However, the outside world is a sleeping world because it was actually destroyed. It's similar to how Space Paranoids is. Since it's a world inside of a computer, the outside world is the one that is truly destroyed. It would be like if Radiant Garden was destroyed. That doesn't necessarily mean that Space Paranoids would be destroyed, because they're technically two different worlds. However, since the Radiant Garden does house Space Paranoids, if Radiant Garden was to be destroyed, then Space Paranoids would still be affected, the same way that the grid is here. And that is why we still see Dream Eaters in the grid, even though the world is not sleeping. Since the grid cannot dream due to it being Data, that means that Sora is actually in a real world. He is in the true world of the grid, and not in a dreamlike state of it, like in all of the other worlds. However, Riku still is in a dream version of the grid, because he is inside of Sora's dreams. Although Rinzler is a different Tron from the one that Sora met in Kingdom Hearts 2 and Space Paranoids, he was still able to make a connection to Rinzler when he reached for his hand at the very end of the grid story, because Sora had a connection to Tron. It might not be the same Tron, but it was still a Tron, so that means that he was able to make a connection to this Tron, since he had already made one to another one. We see Sam and Korra escape through Riku's story. However, due to the fact that Riku's version of the grid is still a dream, those events haven't actually happened yet. When Sam and Korra truly do escape, then they will go to the real world. I know that there was a big debate of what would happen to Sam and Korra since the outside world is asleep. Would they cease to exist? Would they be trapped in between? Or what? Well, the answer is that the world has been awakened because Sora unlocked the keyhole, allowing it to be awoken. There's a big misconception that Dream Eaters can only exist inside the Unchained Realm. However, that is actually a big misconception. Dream Eaters can exist outside of the Unchained Realm, just like we see here in the grid, as well as in the Key Saga, and even in the after credits scene when Sora goes to Traverse Town again and reunites with his Dream Eaters. To expand on what I mentioned earlier about Tron explaining that the original world was destroyed, Essentially, what he means by that is that since the outside world was destroyed and it is now sleeping, as we see in Dream Drop Distance, that means that the grid was also taken along with it. Just like I mentioned earlier, if the Radiant Garden was destroyed, Space Paranoids would still be affected and essentially, in a way, be destroyed, even though it would still be able to function. Just like how we see the grid is still able to function, even though the outside world is technically destroyed or sleeping at the time. And that is essentially what Tron means when he says that the original world was destroyed. It was just affected when the world that houses the grid was destroyed. However, with that being said, I'm pretty sure I've covered everything to do with Space Paranoids as well as the grid. If there's anything else that you would like for me to elaborate on to do with the grid and Space Paranoids, please let me know in the comments down below and I will gladly do so. If there is something else that you would like me to explain in another video, definitely let me know down below as well. But with that being said, I'll see you next time.